Despite the 937 counts against him, Ariel Castro was defiant, almost rebellious in court, claiming he never beat or tortured the 3 women he held captive for a decade.
I'm not a monster. I'm a normal person. I am just sick. I have an addiction, just like an alcoholic has an addiction.
An addiction to sex, Castro said, the result, he claimed, of having been a victim himself of sex acts as a child. In one of the more breathtaking moments at his sentencing, the man who pleaded guilty to multiple counts of rape said this about his victims.
Most of the sex that went on in the house, and probably all of it, was consensual. These allegations about being forceful on them, that is totally wrong. Because there was times that they would even ask me for sex, many times.
A staggering claim balanced against photos the prosecution revealed in court. Chains, ties, even a motorcycle helmet that police say was placed on at least one victim when she was sexually assaulted. A door rigged with an alarm clock to signal Castro if someone was trying to get out. Showing a model of his home, officials said he'd reconfigured the house to keep the women hidden. Even with the presentation of this huge trove of evidence, Ariel Castro was still bold enough to interrupt the judge several times. This exchange was over the aggravated murder charge.
There was never no evidence of me murderizing a fetus. That never happened.
Mr. Castro, you talked with your attorneys and you made a decision to plead to count 1 as indicted, correct?
I just want to clear the record. I never killed anyone, and I am not a murderer.
The only victim to appear, Michelle Knight, who said she spent, quote, 11 years in hell.
Days never got shorter. Days turned into nights. Nights turned into days. Years turned into eternity.
Knight has told police she was pregnant at least 5 times, but was starved and punched until she eventually miscarried. DNA tests have confirmed Castro is the father of Amanda Berry's young daughter. When we were in Cleveland at the time of the women's rescue, a source familiar with the investigation told CNN that when Berry went into labor, Castro ordered Michelle Knight to deliver the child. The baby was delivered in a plastic tub or pool to contain the mess.
Living behind bars from an early age. In Bolivia, there are more than 2,000 children living with their parents in prison. Inés, who doesn't want us to identify her, says it's terrible for the kids.
As a family, we are destroyed. This is the worst thing that can happen. I wouldn't even wish this on my worst enemy, having to live in jail.
Bolivian authorities passed a law that forbids children over the age of 11 to stay in prison with their parents after a 12-year-old girl was raped by her father and other convicted relatives. Bolivia has an open jail system. That means wives, husbands and children can join their incarcerated family members voluntarily. Children are growing up among criminals, exposed to violence, rape, overcrowding and drugs. They are especially vulnerable.
You can't have children living in prisons because they learn and repeat things that happen in jails. They play as if they were the guards. They line up. They repeat things they see. And parents have to understand that their children are much better living outside than here.
Prison authorities say many children over 11 years old have already been removed from jails. Jose Ramos says most inmates are so poor, parents worry their children will be highly at risk living without them. His 2 daughters live with him in this jail in La Paz.
Parents ask themselves, where will my child be? With whom? Parents want to know what their needs will be, or if their children will even have something to eat or not.
Authorities say their goal is that by December there will be no more children over 6 years old in any Bolivian jail. But most of those children don't have family members to turn to, and for many the dangers will be much the same outside of jail.
Gazans are getting ready to mark the International Quds Day, which takes place on the last Friday of the holy month of Ramadan. Palestinian artists have been working in the past 3 weeks to finish an 80-meter-long mural on the walls of the Palestinian Legislative Council in Gaza to mark the International Day of Quds Day. The artwork was made possible with the generous support from Iran's Islamic Radios and Televisions Union. 10 artists worked almost every night during the fasting month to have the mural ready for the Quds Day.
Al-Quds Day is a very special occasion for Palestinians, and we as artists wanted to express our adherence to Judaism. Al-Quds Day by doing a work of art which will remind people of the importance of the holy city. This is the biggest mural of its kind in Palestine.
The artwork is a mixture of sculpturing and painting. The mural shows the landscape of Jerusalem al-Quds as well as its holy sites.
Al-Quds has a very special place in the hearts and minds of Muslims around the world. Al-Quds Day, which comes on the last Friday of the fasting month of Ramadan, serves as a reminder to everyone that Jerusalem al-Quds is still under Israeli occupation. This was just a wall, but now it is a work of art that reminds people of the holy city.
Quds Day was initiated by the late founder of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. During this international occasion, marches and activities are held around the world in solidarity with Jerusalem al-Quds and the Palestinian people.
This work of art was funded by the Islamic Radios and Televisions Union in Iran as a gift for the Palestinian people on the occasion of the International Al-Quds Day. The union wanted to assert the importance of Al-Quds, and that is why we did the mural on the walls of the Palestinian Legislative Council, because it symbolizes Palestinian sovereignty.
Jerusalem al-Quds was occupied by Israeli forces in 1967 and has been at the core of the Palestinian struggle for freedom.
For 3 years, Jenema and her family have survived in this makeshift hut. They left a house and a farm in the countryside to move to the city and find jobs.
In our village, we have land, but no water for our crops, so we don't have any work. We have come here to work so at least we can eat.
There are millions of people like Jenema in the southern state of Andhra Pradesh. They gather in Hyderabad looking for jobs hauling bricks or cleaning homes. This man turns up offering to pay $4 a day, but the migrants want more. As we leave, Jenema is still waiting for work. But with the announcement that her village will be part of a new state, she's at least hopeful.
If Telangana is created, we'll get jobs. We can even go home because things will improve.
On Tuesday, India's ruling Congress party started the process of creating a new state called Telangana. 10 of Andhra Pradesh's 23 districts, including Hyderabad, will be divided. At this factory that produces iron castings in the outskirts of Hyderabad, the creation of a new state is also cause for hope. This is dirty work, but these components will power the pumps and engines that drive the state's growth. But the owner's optimism is tempered by experience. There are still regular power outages in Hyderabad, which impact his productivity.
Right now we are producing with 60% power availability. We are producing about 250 tons. If full power is available to us, we could make at least about 350 to 400 tons per month.
It will take months for politicians to work out the details of how Telangana will be run, and whoever takes over will have to ensure that the economy grows and helps the people. Hyderabad may be one of India's fastest growing cities, but its poor still continue to build homes rather than own them.
Iran's most controversial president came from the most uncontroversial beginnings. A blacksmith's son and a war veteran who became Iran's 6th president, and a populist who became a pariah. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad leaves the country under pressure, both domestic and foreign. Analysts call his foreign policy approach antagonistic.
Well, his foreign policy, as I indicated at the beginning, was on an offensive approach rather than defensive one. And also, instead of trying to solve our problems with the Western power, and he declared we should get the support of Eastern power as well.
His speeches were often fiery and inflammatory.
Just in the same way as the Soviet Union disappeared and does not exist in today's world, very soon the Zionist regime will also disappear and mankind will be free.
He failed to solve the nuclear dispute. 2 of Iran's negotiators quit, and there's been no breakthrough in a decade. Instead, Iran is under the toughest international sanctions in history. But his stance struck a chord with the Arab street, Africa, and on America's doorstep.
I'm sure this wave of revolution that covers all of Latin America will continue until it eradicates all the roots of imperialism.
Ahmadinejad's administration opened more foreign embassies than any previous government. Domestically, he focused on improving the lives of the poor and removing subsidies that drained $100 billion a year from the government's budget, but in part devalued Iran's currency by more than 70% in 2 years, creating higher inflation and unemployment. The president was almost impeached, and under his watch a $2.6 billion embezzlement case embroiled 7 banks and his closest advisor. His cabinet too was pushed to the brink of collapse, and his relationship with the supreme leader suffered. But millions of Iranians will remember Ahmadinejad for the events of 2009. He won a second term under opposition claims of vote rigging and killings of protesters and mass arrests.
This is perhaps the first time top U.S. and Pakistani politicians have stood together in public to address the divisive issue of drone strikes.
We have registered our concern and will continue to do so, that drone attacks are counterproductive in terms of our relationship.
But it was immediately clear the U.S.'s remote-controlled bombing campaign in Pakistan's northern tribal region won't end anytime soon.
I think the President has made a policy as limited and as clear as is humanly possible, and he has laid out a very transparent, accountable, thorough legal justification for any counterterror policies the United States may or may not engage in.
And while the strategic allies remain at odds over the issue, it would appear both sides are committed to moving the tense relationship forward. In an earlier meeting, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and Secretary of State John Kerry agreed to restart strategic talks, which first began in 2010. The regular discussions ended a year later following a U.S.-led NATO air attack that killed 24 Pakistani soldiers. Relations between Pakistan and the U.S. were already severely damaged after a series of crises, including the covert U.S. raid that killed Osama bin Laden earlier that year. The resumption of high-level talks is no doubt a significant breakthrough, but there is still deep mistrust between the two countries. As well as drone strikes, some U.S. lawmakers allege Pakistan has ties to armed groups which launch cross-border attacks against American troops in Afghanistan. The Pakistani government denies the accusations. Still, it would appear the governments are serious about overcoming their past differences. Kerry also pledged to help Pakistan improve its energy sector and increase investment.
For 5 weeks he's been saying it, and today was no different. White House spokesman Jay Carney urging the Russians to send Edward Snowden back to the U.S. to face trial.
There is absolute legal justification for Mr. Snowden to be returned to the United States. He's not a dissident. He's not a whistleblower. He's been charged with a crime.
In Moscow, Edward Snowden's lawyer has confirmed his client is now free to look for accommodation outside the main airport.
Concerning his place of residence, he'll choose it himself. He can live in a hotel or an apartment. As he's one of the most wanted people on earth, he'll be making sure his place of residence is absolutely safe.
30-year-old Edward Snowden arrived at Moscow's main airport from Hong Kong on the 23rd of June. Since then, he's been stuck in the transit zone after the United States revoked his passport. He initially planned to fly on to Latin America, where 3 countries say they'd offer him asylum. But later, appearing alongside human rights activists, he admitted fears of being detained on the way were keeping him in Moscow. Snowden, a former systems analyst at the National Security Agency, faces felony charges after leaking details of vast US government surveillance programs. These include Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's visit to Washington next week, a bilateral between Obama and Putin in Moscow in September, ahead of the G20 summit in St. Petersburg, and the UN General Assembly at the end of September. At the State Department, they're stressing if any of those occasions wind up being cancelled, the US and Russia will still have much to talk about.
We're not going to stop engaging with them on Syria, on the way forward, on missile defense, on any of these issues, because one meeting does or does not happen.
On Sunday, Edward Snowden's father said he'd be happy for his son to stay in Russia permanently.
I believe this from my heart, that Russia is the safest place for my son.
Now it looks like that wish is coming true, at least for the next 12 months.